Welcome back to Motivation Library. Today we're going to be diving deep into this book that caused quite a stir when it first came
Yeah.
out.
Oh.
It's called The Polygamous Sex,
Yeah.
A Man's Right to the Other Woman by Esther Vilar.
Okay.
Now, you might know Vilar from her really controversial bestseller, what was it called? The Manipulated Man,
Right.
where she argues that women actually hold all the power in society.
Interesting.
So in The Polygamous Sex, she kind of takes an even deeper look at these dynamics between men and women,
Yeah.
focusing in on love and relationships,
Okay.
and of course, power.
So what's her main argument?
Well, it's fascinating, really.
Okay.
She kind of uses a blend of biology, psychology, and just her own, observations of society to back up her claims.
I see.
And she's not afraid of controversy at all,
Definitely noticed that.
which is probably why her work just, sparks so much discussion.
Yeah, people tend to have pretty strong opinions about her work.
For sure. And to be totally upfront, Vilar's work has been praised and criticized by folks across the political spectrum,
Right.
Some people view her as an advocate for men's rights, while others see her as being, misogynistic.
Yeah, I can see how people would get both of those takes from her work.
Exactly. But, we're not here to take sides.
Of course.
Our goal in this deep dive is to really try to explore Vilar's ideas as objectively as we can.
Sounds good.
So we're going to focus on presenting the core ideas without adding our own opinions or anything like that.
It's like a journey into her mind.
Exactly. A journey into her very unique and often very thought-provoking perspective on love and relationships.
I'm intrigued already.
Whether you agree with her or not, I think it's a journey worth taking.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, right off the bat, Vilar throws out this question.
What's that?
Are there actually two different types of love?
Two different types, huh?
Yeah, and to kind of illustrate this point, she uses this hypothetical film scene. Picture this, you've got a man and a woman on this deserted beach.
Romantic.
The woman, she confesses that she's fallen in love with someone else, and she wants to leave.
Oh, that's tough.
And the man, claiming to love her very deeply, tells her to go and be happy.
That's interesting.
Right. So this scene, it really sets the stage for Vilar's main argument.
I see.
She's saying there's a difference between what you might call true love, which is selfless and focused on the other person's happiness.
Right.
And then there's this other kind of love.
Okay.
It's more conditional, more possessive,
Oh, I see.
and it's driven by our own, biological needs.
That makes sense.
This is where Vilar's analysis gets really interesting.
Okay.
She goes deep into the biological roots of love,
Biology and love.
Yeah. And she points to these three basic principles of life:
What's her?
self-preservation,
Okay.
reproduction,
Got it.
and nurturing.
Interesting.
And her argument is that these principles actually shape our romantic choices, even if we don't realize it. She says we're drawn to partners based on one of two major instincts: reproduction or nurturing.
Okay, so like a sex partner versus a caretaker type.
Exactly. So a sex partner satisfies our, sexual needs.
Right.
But then you have what she calls a protege, someone who needs our protection.
And who we want to nurture.
Right. And she points out that there are very specific, biological factors that make us more attracted to one type or the other.
So she's saying our biology is playing puppet master with our hearts, essentially.
Pretty much. Vilar is suggesting that, biologically speaking, we might be attracted to different people for completely different reasons.
Depending on what our biology is telling us we need at that time.
Exactly. And she doesn't stop there.
Where else does she go with this?
Well, she connects this to the idea of love thy neighbor.
Okay.
That altruistic love we feel for, for humanity as a whole.
Okay, yeah.
And she says it's basically an extension of that nurturing instinct we were talking about.
So not just our immediate family, but everyone.
Exactly. Encompassing this much broader sense of care for others.
That's a really interesting connection.
Now, this brings us to another big concept in the book, the whole power dynamic in relationships.
Okay, this should be good.
And Vilar, she defines power in a very specific way,
Okay, how so?
It's all about who can manipulate the other person into meeting their needs.
Manipulation.
And she links it back to those, those two fundamental instincts.
Reproduction and nurturing.
Exactly.
This is where things might start to get a little controversial.
You think?
Maybe just a little.
Well, here it is. Vilar says that the weaker partner actually often holds the true power.
The weaker partner. How does that work?
So she argues that, while women might be physically weaker in general,
Okay.
they actually have more power in relationships
More power. Why?
because they control what men what men biologically crave.
The sex and nurturing.
You got it.
So is she saying that women are like master manipulators, using their femininity to kind of like control men?
I mean, that's definitely one way to interpret it.
It's a bold statement for sure.
Vilar does suggest that women sometimes, they manipulate their appearance
Okay.
and even their intelligence to seem weaker
To seem weaker, why would they do that?
because it helps ensure that they'll have a provider.
Oh, I see.
And she also argues that they often choose older, more successful men as partners.
So is she saying women are just gold diggers?
Not necessarily, but she's saying that often those men are better suited to meet their needs,
For security, for resources.
Right. And it definitely brings up these questions about, about societal expectations.
And the roles we feel pressured to play.
Exactly. And Vilar goes even further with this, this idea of the father syndrome.
Father syndrome, what's that?
So it's where a man kind of like adopts his wife in a way,
Adopts his wife.
mixing up his nurturing instincts with sexual desire.
Okay, that's a little unusual.
It is. And she even goes as far as to connect this father syndrome to the concept of incest.
Incest. Wow, that's a strong statement.
Right. Suggesting that marriage can sometimes be seen as like a socially acceptable form of that dynamic.
So how does this father syndrome fit into her idea of polygamy?
Well, according to Vilar, this father syndrome actually contributes to male polygamy.
Contributes to it. How so?
Because men need to satisfy both their nurturing and sexual instincts,
Okay.
but often with different women.
So she's saying men are naturally polygamous.
She seems to think so, yes.
Okay.
She breaks down all these different types of polygamy, from a man juggling multiple relationships at the same time
Okay.
to just having, affairs while still maintaining that main relationship.
Spectrum of polygamy.
Exactly. It's not just one size fits all,
So does that mean she thinks women are naturally monogamous then?
Well, she actually argues that when you have true love between a man and a woman,
Yeah.
it's naturally monogamous,
Okay.
jealous, even, and faithful.
Okay, so true love equals monogamy, according to Vilar.
That seems to be her take.
Okay, so then how does she explain all those short-lived romances or, affairs that happen?
Well, she says those fleeting romances are all about idealization.
Idealization.
You get caught up in this fantasy of who the other person is, but then,
Reality sets in.
and you're drawn back to that comfort and familiarity of your primary partner.
Where you find that total definition she talks about.
Exactly. Before we move on, if you guys are enjoying this deep dive into the polygamous sex, make sure to hit that like button.
Yes. And don't forget to subscribe to Motivation Library for more, thought-provoking book summaries.
We really appreciate your support.
It helps us keep the Motivation Library growing. Now, where were we? Oh, right. Vilar also talks about the role of these, public fathers, especially journalists, and their influence on how society views women.
Public fathers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I follow.
It's a fascinating concept. So Vilar argues that mass media plays a big part in portraying women as, as weak and in need of male protection.
Okay.
And she says this is fueled by the motivations of these public fathers.
Public children. What does that even mean?
Well, it's not talking about literal children.
Yeah.
It's more like it's more about a societal role, people who just embody this image of women needing, a male guardianship.
I think I understand.
And this all kind of leads up to probably the most controversial part of the book.
It is.
Vilar's claim that that women, not men, actually hold the true power in society.
Hold on. So we're back to that power dynamic thing. How does she back that up, though?
Well, Vilar argues that because women control access to, to sex and nurturing,
Good.
they basically can dictate how society is structured, and they can, manipulate men into fulfilling their needs.
It's a pretty bold statement.
It is. And to support this, she looks at, at historical examples.
Like what?
Well, things like the rise of Christianity. Okay.
And the success of certain political movements.
Interesting.
Her point is that by understanding the power dynamics between women, we can shed light on things that seem totally unrelated.
I'm starting to see what she's getting at.
It's pretty complex stuff.
It is. And, it's really interesting to think about how her analysis, which was written in the 1970s, applies to today's world.
Right. Things have changed a lot in terms of gender roles and, just social perceptions.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Vilar's work so thought-provoking,
It forces us to really question our assumptions and re-examine, These power dynamics that might be playing out in our own lives and relationships.
There's a lot more to uncover here.
So much more to unpack in the polygamous sex. We're going to be right back in part 2 to continue exploring Vilar's controversial and, let's be honest, pretty wild ideas.
All right, so we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into Esther Vilar's The Polygamous Sex.
We covered some, some pretty mind-blowing ideas, I'd say.
There's a lot to unpack here, that's for sure. Definitely.
We left off with Vilar's pretty bold claim that women, not men, hold the true power in society.
Yeah, that one raised a few eyebrows.
I know, right? It's a very controversial statement.
To say the least.
But she doesn't just throw it out there.
No.
She tries to back it up, with some pretty interesting arguments.
Okay, so how does she explain that?
Well, remember how we were talking about how Vilar's analysis goes beyond just individual relationships?
Right, she connects those power dynamics to, wider societal structures.
Exactly. And she uses a really fascinating example.
What's that?
The rise of Christianity.
Christianity. Okay, now I'm really curious.
How does that fit into all of this?
All right, seems a little out of left field.
Well, Vilar argues that Christianity, with its emphasis on monogamy and chastity, actually ends up empowering women.
Empowering women? Really? How so?
Think about it.
Okay.
In a monogamous system, a woman's value actually increases.
Okay.
Because she becomes, the sole source of both sexual and emotional fulfillment for her husband.
I see. So by limiting men's options, women gain more control.
That's Vilar's argument, yeah.
That's a really different way of looking at it.
It really challenges that traditional view that, that women are oppressed by these, patriarchal religious structures.
Right.
But Vilar is saying it's actually the opposite.
That women were the ones who kind of orchestrated these structures to their own benefit.
Exactly.
It's interesting because, Vilar's work has often been labeled as anti-feminist.
Yeah.
But this argument actually seems to be making a case for female agency.
And power.
Right. It's like she's acknowledging the influence women have in shaping social norms, even if it's done in subtle ways.
Her work can't really be easily categorized, can it?
Not really. It's pretty complex.
She definitely critiques what she sees as manipulative behavior in women.
Right.
But she also acknowledges their ability to, to really shape things.
And exert influence in these really kind of under-the-radar ways.
Exactly.
Does she give any other examples besides religion to demonstrate this power dynamic?
She does, actually.
Okay, what else does she talk about?
She looks at the success of a bunch of different political movements throughout history.
Yeah, political movements. Interesting.
What she points out is that the movements that are really successful at appealing to, to women's interests,
Yeah.
those are the ones that gain the most traction.
So she's saying that if you want to win over, the masses,
You got to win over the women.
basically, what specific movements does she talk about?
Well, she brings up examples like the women's suffrage movement
Okay.
and the rise of certain socialist ideologies, things like that.
So her argument is that these movements, they were successful because they tapped into those deep-seated desires that women have.
For security, for stability, for a better life for themselves and their kids.
And she's saying that politicians and revolutionaries, they've always kind of understood this.
And tailored their messages accordingly.
So there's this link between understanding female psychology and actually achieving real political success.
That's what she argues, yeah.
Wow, it's like she's turning the tables on this whole idea that women have just been passive bystanders throughout history.
She portrays them as much more strategic actors.
Shaping events through their choices and influence.
It's really no wonder her book was so controversial,
She really flips the script on all these traditional ideas about, gender roles and power dynamics.
And she doesn't shy away from criticizing both men and women.
Right. She doesn't let anyone off the hook.
She calls out men for being, susceptible to manipulation.
But then she turns around and criticizes women for using their femininity to gain comfort and security.
Right. It's a two-way street for her.
This is definitely not your average relationship advice book, that's for sure.
It's like she's holding up this mirror to society.
And saying, hey, let's take a good hard look at ourselves.
It forces us to confront some, some uncomfortable truths.
About the games people play in relationships and how those power dynamics are always, at work.
Remember that scene we talked about at the beginning with the man on the beach?
Yeah, the one who lets his wife go.
Vilar argues that even in that scene, there's a subtle manipulation going on.
Even there? How so?
By appearing so noble and selfless, he's actually trying to bind her to him even more tightly.
Using guilt and obligation.
like emotional judo.
So even acts of apparent selflessness can be a form of manipulation. That's a pretty cynical view of human nature.
It is. But Villar's point is that we're often unaware of the hidden motivations driving our actions, especially when it comes to, to love and relationships.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What do you think? What are some of your biggest takeaways from the polygamous sex so far? Let us know down in the comments.
We love hearing from you guys. And if you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to Motivation Library for more explorations of, of these thought-provoking books.
We'll be back with part 3 of our deep dive into the polygamous sex in just a bit, so stay tuned.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Esther Vilar's The Polygamous Sex.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Definitely. We've explored some really heavy ideas.
About the dynamics between men and women.
All those biological instincts, the power dynamics, that whole father syndrome.
A lot to process.
There is, but now I think it's time to tackle the big question that Vilar kind of leaves us with.
Okay, what's that?
Does her analysis, as controversial as it is, does it still hold true today?
In the 21st century.
Exactly.
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, society has gone through some massive changes since Vilar wrote this back in the 70s.
Huge changes.
The feminist movement, gender roles have shifted. Women have made incredible strides in, well, pretty much every area.
Education, the workforce, politics.
So have these changes really altered that fundamental power dynamic between men and women that Vilar describes?
It's a good question.
What do you think?
Well, Vilar's arguments, they're rooted in those biological drives we talked about.
Those primal instincts.
And the power dynamics that just, they naturally come out of those.
So she's saying that no matter how much we progress as a society,
those underlying instincts, they stay the same.
It's like the game might look different on the surface.
But underneath, it's still the same game.
That's one way to interpret it, yeah.
Vilar might argue that the ways in which women use their power have changed.
Adapted to the times.
But that, that desire for security
and control,
which she links back to their biological role as mothers.
Right.
It's still a driving force.
That powerful one.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Right.
It makes you look beyond all the, the surface level stuff and ask.
If those power dynamics have really shifted.
It's a great point.
That's what I think makes Vilar's work so relevant even today.
It sparks these debates.
It makes us really look inward.
And question all those narratives we've been told.
About love, relationships, gender roles, all of it.
It's a book that makes you think, for sure.
It challenges you, doesn't it?
It does.
And at the end of the day, I think that's what really matters.
Engaging in this kind of critical thinking.
About our own experiences.
And how we interact with each other.
What about you? Does Vilar's analysis kind of resonate with your own life, your own experiences?
It's a lot to think about.
Have those power dynamics really shifted? Or are those, those deeper instincts still calling the shots?
It's a fascinating question, and I don't know if there's an easy answer.
That's the beauty of it, I think.
It makes you think.
What do you guys think? What are your biggest takeaways from the polygamous sex?
Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you.
And if you're up for more deep dives into books that, really challenge your assumptions.
Hit that subscribe button and join our Motivation Library community.
We're all about exploring these thought-provoking ideas together.
Thanks for joining us on this intellectual adventure, everyone.
It's been a wild ride.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a book that'll really get you thinking.
Until next time, keep learning and keep questioning everything.